morning, and thanks for joining today's webinar looking at how to reduce cloud application risk and increase cloud security with using CASB. My name is Shona Bradshaw. I'm the Marketing Manager at Bytes Security Partnership. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Jones, who's a Cloud Specialist Engineer at our partner Forcepoint, who will be taking you through the bulk of today's presentation. So a little bit of an agenda for today's session. I'll give a very brief intro to Bytes. I will keep it brief, as many of you know it already. Set the scene for the webinar, talking around why cloud applications need an additional layer of security, before I introduce and hand over to Chris, who will take you through some of the key cloud application challenges and how CASB solutions can work in your arsenal to overcome these before our Q&A. So a little bit of housekeeping for today's session. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout today's presentation, but we do have an interactive Q&A at the end, so please do post those questions via the chat or the questions box, and I'll post them all to Chris at the end. For the purposes of today's session, we won't be talking about commercials on any particular product, however, we'll keep the conversation to strategy and solutions around cloud applications. We do have a recording available post-session, so you'll be able to share the insight in the session with your teams. And lastly, we do have a survey at the end of the webinar sessions. Please do take a minute to fill that in so we can continue to make sure these sessions hit the mark. So a little bit of an intro to Bytes. Who are we? So Bytes Security Partnerships are the security specialist reseller within the Bytes Allied Electronics Group. We've been focusing on network security for over 16 years, and what we aim to do is to marry the agility and insight and the personal approach that you'd expect from the smallest specialist reseller with access to resources and the stability of a large group, the ability to assist into multi-country environments, etc., etc. And we're absolutely passionate around the technical expertise that we provide to businesses via our in-house consultancy and in-house support teams. And that allows us to enjoy, top-tier vendor partnerships, allowing us to deliver real technical excellence in terms of delivery, maintenance, and support on technologies, as well as significant commercial value around those solutions. So where do we work across the whole spectrum of information security, from the network to next-generation firewall, endpoint security, through access and authentication, to data loss prevention, and cloud security, which is what we're talking to you about today. So within those areas, what we offer to customers around the technologies that we recommend is that accredited consultant technology installation, delivery, in-house support around Forcepoint and other technologies via a first-line direct-to-escalation engineer support, first, second, and third line, security strategy development, technology mapping, etc. So we are acting as your eyes and ears, your technical delivery partners to make sure that you are future-proofing your business against significant threats, and that the technologies that you install are deployed to the best of their ability. So that's enough about us. What are we talking to you about today? We've been speaking to customers who are moving into the cloud around some of the challenges that they are facing when they are deploying their cloud applications. The lowered visibility in the cloud does lead to security blind spots and questions around who actually owns the data. At the same time, there are gaps in coverage from traditional security tools. Inbuilt DLP, for example, that comes with cloud providers, does have its limitations, and Chris will refer to some of these as it goes on. Concurrent to that, there has been a significant rise in shadow IT and unsanctioned applications, people spinning up different clouds and different infrastructures to get around the sanctioned applications that are there and to enable them to do the jobs that they want to do. There is no let up in the amount of malicious insiders, compromised privileged users, and that all of the challenges that you would face on premise are there in the cloud to a greater extent. What Chris will take you through today is how CASB solutions can ease cloud adoption and can help address some of these challenges. So I'm going to be introducing Chris today. We've been working with Chris for some years. He's our senior specialist engineer that we work with at Forcepoint, with a myriad of knowledge around both cloud DLP and cloud access security brokerage. Forcepoint have been a platinum partner of ours for over 5 years and really are leading the way in DLP in the cloud and a unified approach to web, email and data security for both cloud and on-premise. And that's why we've asked them to come and share their insight today around how CASB can assist and can reduce cloud risk and increase visibility. So with that in mind, all that remains for me to do is pass over to Chris, who will be taking you through the rest of today's presentation. I'll come back on at the end to ask all your questions to Chris after his presentation. Over to Chris.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Jonah. I'll just share my screen for you, 1 second. Right, so that should have all come up for everybody now. So yeah, as Shane said, I'm one of the sales engineers at Forcepoint, and I've been here for a long time talking about a lot of different sides of solutions. Today, I really want to focus on the CASB element, because this is something that, from my side of things, I'm talking more and more about with customers. Even if we're going to talk about something totally different, often when this point comes up, it's something that takes a lot of interest. Over the last 12 months or so, I've seen this go from something that people have had potentially no understanding of, they haven't heard of it, to something that people are really getting interested in and really trying to get their teeth into. But there's still, I find, quite a bit of confusion around what the capabilities of this are, what it can do, and even in certain cases why you would need to use this. And I'd like to try and cover those pieces off today. So I think this is always worth covering, is what actually is CASB, because it's a bit of a fiddly term that they come up with CASB. It stands for Cloud Access Security Broker. And effectively what we've got is a number of applications that are run, and historically these are applications that people probably would have run locally within their infrastructure. Now, of course, they're run within the cloud. So that's the cloud app side of it. And I've been using cloud solutions in various forms for about 13 or so years now. And in my very early days, somebody explained what cloud was to me, and this is something that I've found quite useful in terms of things like this. Cloud just means somebody else's infrastructure. Fundamentally, that's all it is. I think a lot of people seem to think of the cloud as something that's all-powerful and phenomenal tool, and it absolutely is great at a lot of what it does, and it helps with economies of scale. But really, we are talking about somebody else's infrastructure that your applications are running on. Now, because of that, you don't necessarily have the same control as you would if it was locally. And that's what CASB aims to do. Fundamentally, is to extend the same visibility and control that you would have internally, externally. And if we kind of think about what it was like at one point in the past versus what it's like now, it's probably a good way to do it. So before cloud came along, before people started using all these cloud applications, what were the things that IT administrators and IT managers and all of those people who are involved in that wanted to do? You know, cyber threats, data leakage, file sharing, privileged accounts, bring your own device, monitoring user activity. These are all things that were absolutely critical to be doing, and there's a whole variety of tools that would have been used internally to do that. And I suspect you are all going to be using various sets of these tools already within your existing infrastructure, but of course they don't extend to these cloud pieces. So after cloud, as soon as you got to started using these cloud applications, what were your priorities then? You'll notice that not a lot has actually changed on the side. A couple of logos have suddenly come up in place there, because the activities that were needing to be covered, the threats, the data leakage, file sharing, privileged accounts, bring your own device, user activity, that's all stayed the same. Nothing has really changed. These applications are fundamentally the same things that have been used internally for a very, very long time. And again, that difference is suddenly they've changed to being on somebody else's infrastructure. Your concerns, what you need to achieve, that is still exactly as it was beforehand. So what can CASB tools actually do? What can we assess? What can we see? And what are the basic capabilities of a CASB tool? So this I find is most people's inroad to CASB, certainly with the conversations I've had with most organizations, this is the one that kind of gets people's interest first and foremost, and it's the one that's a very, very obvious concern. It's shadow IT. There's so many cloud applications that exist out there. To be honest, until we started working with CASB tools a few years ago, before we integrated it into our own technology, I had no real idea about quite how many there were out there. There are tens of thousands of these cloud applications that are out there. The issue is, of course, again, going back years ago, anyone wanting to use an application would have taken that via an IT department. It would have had a risk assessment put against it. It would have had somebody with a security expertise look at that and make sure that it was safe or secure, that it fitted the bill, and then run to install that, and probably be very strict about who has access to those sorts of tools. Whereas now, as it's in the cloud, all of the infrastructure, all of the installation part is all taken care of. Now we're taking this effectively as a service, software as a service sort of scenario. That doesn't need to be run via IT, so it's so quick and easy to get these applications up board and get people using them. But the teams that may have brought these things in for whatever reason they're doing it don't always understand some of the more security-based risks that we would have. So really, what we end up with is a load of blind spots within your organization. You don't know what's being used, you don't know who's using it, you don't know what the risk that's associated to those are, and even things like data. How much of your key data is stored within those applications? If you were to suddenly leave that application, what would happen to your data? Is it deleted? Do they retain it? Do they have to do anything with it? Where are they storing this? I'm talking quite a lot at the moment about GDPR. As you imagine, it's a huge shift in how people are approaching data. It's not necessarily, the concepts behind it aren't anything new, and there's lots of other data out there, but this is one that's really bringing people's focus in line. So much personally identifiable information is stored in these cloud applications. So to be able to scan through these applications, understand what's going on with them is pretty key. And that's what a CASB tool fundamentally will do, whether we're looking at the Forcepoint one here or other ones on the market. They'll be able to take a feed of your web-bound traffic, run it through analytics to then say, okay, well, out of all of the traffic that your users have been using, these are the cloud applications that have been visited within these periods of time. This is how much data that's going through. These are the locations you've been visiting them from. All of those activities that you would need to know to identify them. But what it also does, not just say, okay, well, someone's been going to Dropbox, because that probably doesn't tell you that much. You're going to recognize Dropbox.com if you were to see that in a list of things that were being looked at. But it will also start to identify the ones that you wouldn't recognize. So some strange random, Russian Dropbox.com, which you would never have heard of, never recognized, that is going to be highlighted to you. It's also going to be able to identify what risk associated to each of those applications. So some of them you'll be familiar with, and you might actually feel quite safe with them. However, you might not know that they are not liable for certain activities, or that their data is stored in locations where you as an organization cannot have data stored, or that fundamentally that there's risks associated to them, or they've been hacked, or they've been compromised, all of these sorts of things. When we take the applications that you haven't heard of, that you aren't familiar with, it again lets you understand what the risk to your business is for allowing those to be kept in use, whether they need to be retired or dealt with in any way like that. It's also going to point what users are involved in those sorts of things, because that's kind of a critical thing here. In some ways, it doesn't matter too much what is going on within them. It can depend on who the users are that are using them. If you've got a load of fairly low-level employees with not much access to sensitive data or access to critical parts of the environment that you're using, slightly risky applications, yeah, you're going to want to look into it, but it's not nearly as big an issue as if someone who's got access to all of the absolute crown jewels of an organization is engaging with a very, very risky app, or even a not so risky app. The fact that they have more access, that they have more control, and could be a bigger risk if compromised is a bigger problem. And at the end, it allows you to enable those applications in one shape or form. Do we want to start to block particular applications via API or other methods that I'll go into? Are we happy to keep those going? Do we want to take a little bit more further action with them and start turning them into more sanctioned applications and have a much more deep dive and a lot more visibility into them? You can be quite particular in terms of what's happening. And because a lot of these things are done by risk scores, you can say, well, actually, we don't want to allow any high risk applications to be used, even if, and this is going to be for ones for the future. So things that are going to be adopted later on. So the unsanctioned apps is a pretty key thing. And as I said, for me, that's a lot of where people's interest starts with a CASB tool. It's understanding what your risk footprint is, what apps are being used, who's using them, and just an understanding of what that is. In my opinion, that's just very much the most can do. It's a great place to start, and it tells you a lot, and it can help build a business case to doing more, but that's not really what a good CASB tool is there for. You can do some really, really cool things with a cloud application security brokerage sitting in line between your users and a cloud app. And this is where we start talking about this concept of sanctioned cloud applications. Now, sanctions is potentially a slightly misleading term because, of course, that is suggesting that you're happy with them to be used and people are allowed to go there. What we're now starting to talk about is, okay, well, we are allowing usage of these cloud applications. However, we also want to now manage it. We effectively want to treat that cloud app, that application that's running on someone else's infrastructure, as if it was local. We want to be able to put the exact same controls on that, the same visibility, the same access, the same control of data on that piece. So this is where we can start to take those key concerns of organizations and apply them against them, because through various methods and various policy bases, we can start to do things like preventing cyber threats that are involved within those. We can look at data usage and data loss within those. File sharing, who can access it? Can data be stored in those places in the first place? Can data be taken off of those locations? And if it can, where can it be taken to? With all your privileged accounts, manage all your admins, that's a pretty critical thing, because the people who've got the admin accounts within those hold a lot of power. We've seen plenty of very interesting stories about how people have done some crazy things with cloud applications. There's quite a famous one of an organization that was storing a huge amount of their infrastructure within Amazon Web Services, and somebody went in and accidentally deleted the vast majority of their cloud infrastructure. And Amazon Web Services didn't have effectively a kind of a confirm thing, didn't have any way of stopping those things from being quickly and easily deleted. That's a great part of cloud, that's very easy to spin something up and spin something down when you do and don't need it. It also can mean, if you're running critical parts of your infrastructure, that's a big problem. Bring your own device access. Suddenly your data is in the cloud, all of your infrastructure is there. People can access it from any old device, which means your data, your activities are being spread across things that you have no control, no visibility of, which then goes for all of the user activity. Whether we're talking about things that are happening on an own device or whether they're on an unmanaged device, we still want to know who's doing what they're doing. So let's break down a couple of the points and things that CASB solutions are able to do. And specifically, this is kind of the things that the Forcepoint CASB solution does. So one of the features that we have is user behavior analytics. This isn't to be confused with UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics, which is much more in depth and is something the Forcepoint does also provide. But it's an approach to look at any user's activity within a cloud application, whether they are a standard user, a privileged user, or an administrator, to see what they're doing, when they're doing it, where they're doing it, how they're doing it, and how that differs from their normal activity. Now, there can be certain policies that can be put in place to start to trigger things that you think, okay, well, we know that this feels suspicious to us. But even out of the box with no work done on your side, it's going to start to be able to flag activities. It's going to be able to look at anomalies and capabilities that are different. It's going to then start to give risk scores against those. And that's where things get nice and simple, because you don't want to have to look through every single user to from click by click to understand their behavior. You want something that summarizes and says, well, actually, out of the few thousand people you've got in your organization, only 5 of them reached a high risk score and therefore bear looking at and want to be drilled down into. But it's going to be able to detect anomalies, and that's a pretty critical part. Whether you deploy this in line or via the API, it's going to look at that user activity and start to identify threats and cyber hacks and things like that that are going on. Brute force account takeovers, people acting or behaving differently than they would normally do. It's able to detect those, audit those, alert on those, and again, even put policies in place to stop activities from happening there. It'll also be able to detect ransomware attacks because of the patterns that they would involve, and that's quite an interesting thing. With a lot of bits of malware, the activities they do is actually what alerts us to them being there in the first place. Once we recognize the activity, we can start to change the privileges that user might have within the system. We can start to lock things down. We can start to change rules to actually make sure that none of these things can continue to happen. And again, policies based around all of these sorts of things. So it's not a case of you needing to build rules or understand this sort of behavior. We have this capability in place. And we've even seen these sorts of things used kind of reverse side things. So we're talking about here sanctioned applications. And there's a lot of examples that people would be using with this G Suite, Amazon, Office 365, Dropbox, again, thousands and thousands of applications. We can also start to pull in customer applications as well. And some of the bigger use cases and bigger customer accounts that we have within CASB are actually taking this tool and put it against their own cloud applications. We've got quite a lot of banking and finance organizations that use this service that have used it to protect their customers who are looking to join their cloud application, do online banking, because it's a great tool to be able to detect things like fraud and attacks like that. Again, it's all user behavior analytic driven. If we understand the user's behavior, we understand what's interesting and what's different, we're able to prevent attacks, whatever that attack may be. Another tool we have for preventing cyber attacks and threats is our advanced malware detection. Now, this is an add-on, so this isn't something that comes within the core part of the product, but it can be added on as needed. And this is our sandboxing capability. So we're always going to be doing standard scanning for threats and activities that are going on, but as we're all aware, there are some threats and bits of malware out there that are going to evade pretty much any standard or even non-standard approach and need to be run through that sandbox capability. They need to be triggered in a live environment to see what they do. Now, the detection capabilities that we use in independent tests have come back with a score of 100% efficacy and 0 false positives. Now, of course, that's not a guarantee because threats and malware change and evolve. But compared to the competitors that were being tested in this environment, is significantly ahead of what we're seeing. And it's the reason why we use this technology. They do things a little bit differently, which gives them a lot more accuracy and those less false positives. We use the same tool in quite a few of our other products, our next-gen firewalls, our email, and our web security. So it's just a capability that you can plug into any tools that you would be using with Forcepoint. It just means in this situation, any files that are stored within those cloud applications uploaded and the like, we're able to take those, sandbox them, and make sure that there's nothing malicious within those. So the next part to talk about, and this is a real key part that I'm spending probably almost the majority of my time talking about in terms of CASB, is the data side of things. Because if you have a cloud application, there's a very, very good chance that you have a lot of your information and data stored within this. Now, the CASB tool has a lot of predefined compliance templates already built into that, PHI, PII, PCI. I think there's about 25 additional ones in, as well as those. And you're able to analyze the applications as they are, find out what data is already in them, but also start to put rules around what people can do with them. So maybe you're happy for that information to exist there in the first place, maybe you're not. Maybe you're happy for that to be shared everywhere. Maybe you want to put in particular restrictions for that. It can't be used, can't be copied down to any mobile devices, for example. It can't be copied down to unmanaged devices. It can't be moved from this environment to another. I'm working on an account at the moment whereby they are happy to have information stored in Office 365. However, they're a global organization and they need certain data to only be stored on Office 365 environments within the EU. So even making sure that certain data can't go within certain parts of a cloud application and monitoring the whole process. So there's a number of things that can be done with this if we discover the data. Auditing's a very, very common piece. We just want to know exactly what's happening, but we can also quarantine it. We can keep a copy of it in a safe location so that if people are altering it, people are changing it, that you have all of the information that you would actually need to. The next big thing in terms of data, on the other hand, is if you are an existing Forcepoint DLP customer, or you might find yourself in a situation where you say, well, we're really keen on understanding the data that we have in our cloud applications. However, what we're using is far more complex than a standard compliance template is going to be able to pick up. We need to do more than that. We need to be able to understand things that are absolutely unique to us as a company. So what we've done is taken our standalone DLP tool, which can understand any type of data, be it very, very simple or very, very complex. And via APIs, we've integrated that with our CASB tool. So now, if you're using our CASB tool and our DLP tool, any policies that you've got running in one area can be applied to the other part as well. It's just a seamless integration between those two pieces. So the last couple of bits before we start to wrap up. The last thing that I want to start to talk about is the deployment side of this, because we talked a bit about the features, capabilities of what it can do, and how it's able to start almost kind of mirroring the behaviors that you have locally and that you would have within these cloud applications. But how's that going to integrate? There's a number of ways. What I find is that almost all of the people that we have using this use a quite large variation of different ways to integrate this. So we have agents that do a number of things. So things like the shadow IT discovery, for example. We can just take a feed from any existing sources you've got, firewalls, proxies, anything along those lines, and feed them into an agent, which can do those sorts of classifications. We also have endpoints that you can deploy that will route the traffic to our cloud infrastructure to do all of these things. We have vanity URLs that you can use for really easy testing. So if I go to 123 at forcepointcasb.com, that will also actually redirect us to your Office 365 deployment. It's a great, easy way to get this up and running, nice and quick, and test it. It's not necessarily suitable for your full deployments, and that's where you can start to potentially look at things like cloud APIs, because they're already linked in with these cloud applications. We can understand them. It's a very quick and easy way of going from having nothing in place to having a very good range of coverage. And it's not going to impact the users. It's not necessarily a great way to do things like blocking, because it's only near real time, and not all of those will allow blocking. And that's where something like our cloud proxy can come in place. And again, something like an endpoint agent could do the routing here. Most common method that I'm using for the proxies is single sign-on. And that's because it will then cover all devices, both managed and unmanaged. It'll monitor all user activity, got all your blocking, all of your alerting, no API dependency. There's a huge bonus to you if you are doing something like that. Any traffic that goes to any of those locations, and this is best used for your sanctioned applications, is always going to have to go through the Forcepoint CASB tool. It's always going to be monitored because effectively it is in line. And of course, this is, when we look at it, it's a single platform for any SaaS platform as a service and infrastructure as a service capabilities that you've got out there. Lots of capabilities, and we do have documentation that can detail everything. Today, I've just given a pretty high level overview of some of the capabilities, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of other actions that it can do in terms of managing people's access and controls and what can be done. But if you think about it as, first we discover potentially what is going on, we get to see what it is, either because of the shadow IT thing or just looking at what is going on within your sanctioned apps and auditing them. Because then we can start to say, okay, well, what's the risk associated to us with this? And things like our user behavior analytics are a great way of surfacing that. Because once you understand what's going on, what the risk is, you can then start to build a program to say, okay, well, these are what we need to action. These are the controls we need to put in place. These are the things we need to protect. So just fill that slide up. So what we offer is a number of things within the tool. Hopefully I've covered them off in detail, but to kind of summarize those. Firstly, we're talking about visibility, not just visibility over those cloud applications, but deep visibility into those sanctioned applications that are being used either because of the user behaviors, the sorts of data that people are going on, or any sort of activity that's happening within those. From a protection perspective, again, pulling things like the user behavior analytics is a real key part to what we do. I can't stress how important that piece is. It's something that not a lot of vendors out there necessarily do, but will give you a big part of protection. But also things like integrating with our advanced malware detection sandbox capability, or our DLP solution means that you've got a world-class set of protection in place for that. And then finally, with the architecture, as I said, a range of deployment options from APIs to endpoints to reverse proxies with single sign-on and the like. You can pick and choose what makes sense for each individual application. So that wraps up the presentation from my side today. I've been talking about the CASB part of what Forcepoint offers, but as you can see from this last slide, there's also a number of things that Forcepoint also offers, from full-on user behavior analytics, user and entity behavior analytics, to DLP, inside threat capabilities, web and email gateways, our data guard capabilities, and our next-gen firewalls. And what you will see is that a lot of these solutions actually integrate and interact with each other. So I talked about how our DLP solution there can integrate with our CASB tool, but you'll also see things like the shadow IT discovery capabilities appearing on our web gateways, or integrated with our firewalls in terms of routing. Things like the user behavior analytics, again, there's a different version of that within CASB, but that information can again feed back into that larger tool to start to give you a much more informed view of how users behave. So that's my presentation concluded. And you will also find a lot of information, data sheets, demos, and the like on the Forcepoint website. If you'd like to get a proper demonstration of the product and actually see all of the things that it can do, rather than the kind of high-level view that we've taken today, I would suggest kind of getting in touch with your Bytes representative, and they can arrange that direct with us at Forcepoint. What I'll do now, though, is I'll open the forum up. I don't know if there's any questions. I know Shona will take that, but outside of that, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation today, Chris. I found that really useful to pass out the audiences as well. I just want to invite the audience to put any questions to Chris regarding any elements of CASB and some of the cloud application scenarios that he ran through during the presentation, etc. Any questions, if you can, we'll just take a minute while I thank you all for your time for attending today, and pop those over to Chris in the next minute or so. Thanks. While you're all merrily typing away, I'm sure, I just want to thank Chris very much for his time this morning. Thanks for the presentation he gave, and also thank you all for your time, taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's webinar. We do have, as I said, the session has been recorded, so we'll make sure that you receive the link to the recording by the end of the day, so you can share that within your teams. And please do take a couple of minutes, or a couple of seconds to be honest, to fill in the feedback survey at the end, so that we can make sure that these sessions are continuing to be informative and useful to yourself. So I haven't had any questions from the audience as of yet. So I'll just, if anyone has any questions, of course, please do route them via your Bytes account manager if they occur to you after the session, or email myself to ask those questions. I'll make sure the team do answer those. Thanks everyone for attending today. Thanks Chris for his presentation, and have a lovely afternoon.